let's talk. We had something interesting happen the other day, and part of the outcome of that, I feel like, is something we can reflect on. So let me give it to you in the order it happens. This makes a little bit of sense. Vies and Foyer, my home group, and the Barony of Dameron, our neighbors immediately to the south. We pretty much half of our respective borders are a joint line between the two groups. Have a joint rakier practice, and we have for years now. Very recently, that practice had to move. The site that was hosting it changed their schedule, mundane reasons, nothing to do with the SCA, and the new site had to be located. Tough decisions had to be made. Available site was located, and a new site was chosen. Unfortunately, it was far enough south that a handful of us couldn't make it. It was just so far south that we can't, a bunch of us, probably about four of us really, couldn't make the drive. Once we got off the work, once we got our kid, once we got in the car, it was just too far to drive and still be able to do anything productive when we got there before site closed. So four of us got together, and ultimately we decided we're going to do our own local fighter practice up here in Vies and Foyer. And kind of organically, it started off as just a little instant messenger chat between the four of us, and that grew a little bit. And it's not like there's a template on how you start your own fighter practice, or if there is, someone didn't give me a memo. But then something interesting happened in that someone created a dedicated Facebook group for the fighter practice. And as soon as that, which on the surface makes sense, that way we have a public-facing place where we can coordinate. But as soon as someone did that, as soon as that was done, the Baroness commented, "Why do we have a dedicated Facebook group for our fighter practice? Why can't the fighters coordinate their practices and talk on the main baronial Facebook page?" And that led to an interesting question. Now, obviously there's nuance here, and obviously, depending on how chatty and how big your practices are, this is not an answer for everyone. But it does highlight a very prevalent tendency in the SCA, and in many cases without, to silo different groups very readily, especially in an age of online communication. We were all set up to take us four, and right now there aren't too many others in the fighter practice. There may be a few more that roll in, but for the moment, let's just say four of us. It put us in our own little bubble where our interactions, our conversations, our jokes, our ups and downs, our scheduling considerations were in their own airspace where no one else was going to see them. Now, on the surface, that sounds like, okay, great. The fighters have their own space, and they're not going to clutter up the airwaves with their stuff on top of everyone else's. But the thing is that we don't have a lot of traffic at all on the baronial Facebook group right now. We don't have a lot of traffic at all on the baronial Discord server. Does further sticking us into a separate little bubble help that? And the answer is it doesn't in our case. When the fighting community, when any community, is allowed to exist in its own separate airspace where their social communications, their jokes, their challenges, their triumphs aren't available for general consumption for the non-fighters, we become kind of a non-entity. Now, I've seen this happen even before the digital communications age set in. When I first started playing, the normal culture in Onsteora, never mind Shire Moonshadow, the general culture in Onsteora was you go to an event, there was always 3-day camping events, so you show up Friday night, set up camp, Then Saturday was the event, and then you go to sleep, and you wake up Sunday, you break down, you go home. Everyone else would get up, and we would go do our thing, whatever it was. I did Bardic. I also did court heralding. I would also do list heralding for the fighters, whether it was rapier or shiv or both, if they weren't at the same time. I'd have 5 or 6 things I was doing that day throughout the day, and on top of that, I would go get to hang out and socialize with my friends around the site. And you would see that in you see that with the rapier community, you'd see that with the missile community, you'd see that with the artisans, you'd even see that with the workers, the volunteers on site. They'd go do their 2 and 3 hour shift, or they would do 2 or 3 different shifts. They'd still have time between those to go hang out and socialize and be seen. Not the shift fighters. The shift fighters would get up. They were getting up not quite crack of dawn, but about either a half hour or 45 minutes before court, and they'd start hauling all their kit out to the side of the list field. For some of these guys, that's sword, shield, usually 2 or 3 swords, a shield, 2 or 3 pole arms, their armor, which some of these guys, that's a big bag. That's its own trip. You do not want to haul that plus anything else. Probably a lawn chair or some sort of folding chair to sit all the stuff on. Sometimes some of these guys had a big enough footprint, so to speak, that they'd bring their own pavilion, and they and their squires or their countrymen would set up a pavilion at the corner of the field so they were in shade as they were getting ready to fight. And then they'd lay all this stuff out. They'd get there. If they stop, take a break, usually 5-10 minutes, get a drink of water, drink some of the Gatorade from the water bearers. And then they'd have to start armoring up so they could do armor inspection. And once you have your armor on, that armor is comfortable and mobile in a lot of cases. They certainly weren't hurting for freedom of movement. But that's not something you're just going to casually stroll off to have a conversation in. When you're in armor, especially during summers and springs, and the early part of the fall, to be fair, it's hot. You're not wasting energy. If you are not immediately engaged in fighting, you're resting in preparation for that fighting. That was the overwhelming average before the tournament started. Then you have the tournament. Those tournaments could last, especially if it's a big baronial tournament, could last 2 or 3 or sometimes even 4 hours. I've seen them that long. And then, it's not like when you get knocked out of the tournament, you could walk off, but a lot of guys would stay to see who won, would stay to cheer on their friends, probably the Squire brothers, or, their other members from their local group or whatever. So they were invested in the tournament. Then when the tournament's done, they got to reverse the process they just started. All of the kit, all of the weapons, they brought a pavilion, all that gets taken down. And they got to truck that back to their camp. They're exhausted. Even in cool or cold weather, they are usually soaked with perspiration. They are not fit to be around people. Like, they smell horrible. They are disgusting. It's a hard, punishing athletic activity. The body's condition represents that. That's no slight on them. This is a hot, sweaty activity. Some of them would possibly be dealing with twisted ankles or pulled muscles. All of them would have bruises of one sort or another. They wouldn't necessarily, on top of being exhausted, on top of coming off of an adrenaline dump, and then having that wear off suddenly, they're going to be tired. They're probably going to be a little bit grouchy. A lot of these guys just want to go back to their tents, possibly lay down, or possibly grab a change of clothes and go to the showers and clean off, so they can get all of that sweat, all of that salt, and all of that gunk off of them. By the time they're done changing, the majority of them are tired and want to go lay down. Or, if it's a really long tournament, by the time they're done all that and they've waited their turn, they got in the shower, it's time for a feast. And they're going to go sit next to their spouse, very likely, or their romantic partner, at a feast table, maybe 2 or 3 other people immediately around them. And they're not generally inclined to go around and socialize and make merry like those of us who haven't been running around swinging heavy weapons all day. So what you have is one particular group, because of a lot of very legitimate, very real logistical characteristics of their field. These are all legitimate physical demands. No one there is trying to snub anyone. No one there is trying to be a social hermit. They were much more isolated from the rest of the SCA than most of the rest of the people at that event. That was the overwhelming average. Were there exceptions to that? Sure. Were there shiv fighters who did go out and socialize, even in armor? Sure. But the overwhelming majority of them, that was their existence. If they went to a tournament, if they went to an event to enter the tournament, that was their one and only priority until Feast, was getting set up for the tournament, fighting in the tournament, tearing down from the tournament, cleaning up after that. And that was a full day. And that leads to a very different SCA experience for members of the chivalric community than members of just about any other community. Now you may ask, don't the rapier fighters have the same situation? The reality is, no, they didn't. The rapier fighters, they're not wearing the heavy layered armor that causes the type of ungodly perspiration and ungodly, the clothes are not going to be soaked under layers of protective gear with fabric underneath them. They're going to be hot and sweaty if it's hot out, but they're not going to be any more hot and sweaty than the rest of us are, probably. Or maybe a little bit. But and they're not dealing with the type of physical punishment that the shiv community was going through. And there are probably other reasons. I was not a rapier fighter at the time, so I couldn't tell you firsthand the differences. But it was empirical that the rapier community had a much broader and more integrated public face. You saw rapier fighters at more non-fighting activities at events than you did shiv fighters. And I'll stand by that experience. Now, I'm not pulling that up as an example or a standing problem. I'm not saying that all situations are the same. That is, however, an example of siloing. That is an example of one group, through circumstances not even necessarily of their own making, it's not anyone's fault, being isolated, being separated from the larger SCA group, larger SCA ecosystem or culture, and that causing significant differences. That it can also cause friction. It can cause problems within a group, and that doesn't even necessarily mean interpersonal problems. If I do not see you at the activities I am attending, I can't recognize what you've done. I can't recommend you for an award. And we saw that happen. We saw shiv fighters who fought for 2 or 3 years. They were good fighters, and they were helping at the shiv practices. They were putting in hard work. They were helping to fix armor. They were doing things that were ANS in. They were doing service things. But only the other fighters were seeing them. And all of the people who normally did award recommendations weren't. And so these people weren't being recognized. They were going years without recognition, while other people who did the same amount of work, the same type of work in a different environment, were getting recognized very quickly. Is that anyone's fault, really? No. No one at any point in time said, we want to do it this way. And they certainly were not saying, we want to do it this way to cut off or hurt this group or to advantage this other group here. It was just a very nasty byproduct of the circumstances around the chivalric community. Now, that leads to a question. How do you countermand that if you see that in any activity today, whether it's chivalric, or missile community, archery, whatever? How do you keep a group from becoming siloed in their own little airspace, where their social norms, their conversations, their jokes, their lives are not welcomed, are not recognized, because no one sees them in the general local community? And I can tell you what I saw as a player 20, 25 years ago, and that's we bent over backwards to make sure our non-fighters showed up to fighter practices. Our artisans showed up to fighter practices. Our leadership showed up to fighter practices and made sure the fighters understood they were welcome and they were encouraged to show up to other activities. It was absolutely encouraged. Hey, you guys that fight, why don't you come show up to our dance practice? Hey, you fighters, why don't you come show up to our arts and sciences practice or arts and sciences meeting? We're teaching a class on this or this or this. And a lot of times, some of those things were catered to help encourage the fighters to show up. We did one arts and sciences class where someone taught how to paint figures on shields. I mean, that's legitimately an art, but it's also applicable for the fighters because they get to decorate their shields. We did one that had to do period boot making, which the SCA has evolved since that class was considered good. But still, we had 7 or 8 fighters, including myself, who showed up and we made these period leather things that passed for footwear at the time. It takes extra work. It takes extra effort. But it also is very important because in my home group at the time, when we did that, it wasn't the ship community, the rapier community, the ANS community, and the general populace. It was the general populace, period. It had some fighters, some ship fighters, some rapier fighters, some artisans. But as a group, we had a coherent, all-encompassing culture where I got to regularly see the artisans and the fighters and the rapier fighters and the missile community and, all of it, we all interacted together. And that was a healthier, stronger group for it. Now, fast forward to today. Let's go back to the example here of the Facebook group. By the way, that prompted a very quick discussion between us, the rapier fighters, who are, doing this practice, this brand new ink so wet on the paper practice, and we decided, you know what, we have an opportunity to do something different, and now we're doing all of our general planning on publicly facing pages as part of the general baronial conversation. We don't have our own separate Facebook group or Facebook channel. We don't have our own. We have a separate Discord channel, but we do a lot of our planning on the main general group Discord, so that we want everyone to see it. We want non-fighters to see it, be aware it's there, be aware that they're welcome to come hang out with us and chat and maybe do weaving or painting at a table. And we want that. We don't want people to have to come find our information. We want it out in public. And that has helped. That has helped bridge gaps, even with our fledgling group, rather than starting to immediately see, what would otherwise be expected signs of siloing. We have artisans who show up. Our Baron, who does not fight rapier, is showing up and regularly working on some of his ANS stuff on the bench at our practices. And that is creating cross-connection. One of the other things that where you see siloing, and this is something that I was very adamant about when I first saw it. When we started seeing Discord servers show up here in Onsteora, I was watching some of these servers get set up with 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 channels. I'm not exaggerating. I am seriously not exaggerating. Between channels and subchannels, you could click through 30 or 40 different channels. And what was even more ludicrous, and I'll absolutely say this without reservation, was some of these servers would have a rule that said if you change topics, you need to move to the server, you need to move to the channel relevant to that topic. So I would be talking with someone in general conversation. We'd be talking about an event I was at. And I remember one of them, I said, we're talking about someone's armor and how they had a really cool, I think it was an articulated halter for their shoulder. And I was talking with another player from down south in my kingdom. And I'd say 5 minutes into this, we're going back and forth. One of the administrators came in and said, "You're talking about armor. This needs to move to the ANS channel." Okay. So, and it's not just him and me. There's 3 or 4 people who are part of this, but mostly him and I driving the conversation. So we hop over to the ANS channel. Well, of the 3 or 4 people in the conversation, I think 3 of us in total made it. So you just took a conversation from 4 to 3 for moving it. So we get talking. I'm not happy about this. We get talking, and it shifts to the decoration the guy had on his armor and how he had his heraldry. And me being a herald, that led to the conversation about the difference between arms and badges. And I was doing a quick explanation. All of a sudden, another same administrator, and that one comes in and says, "You're talking about heraldry. Move to the heraldry channel." Well, by the time I made the hop to the heraldry channel, it was just him and me. So we just went from 4 or 5 to 2. There was no reason for that conversation to reduce at all. We were having an organic conversation that moved topics. And now you've just moved it. Now you just effectively killed the group conversation. You've scattered the conversation across 3 channels. And that's not the only time that happened. I watched that happen on a bunch of servers. That is every bit as much siloing as what I just talked about with the fighters. The difference is that I'm not going to argue about intentions because I don't think anyone's doing it mean-spiritedly. But you absolutely can subdivide your channel of communications, whether it's Facebook or Discord or wherever. You can absolutely subdivide your lines of communication beyond reason. When I was in the fire service and I studied incident command, and that's not lowercase incident command, that's capital I, capital C incident command. It's a federal training standard. And the incident command system, or ICS, is the federally created emergency system that all federal and most state and local emergency services train to for incident management, and it's scalable. Incident command, it's the same system that you use to manage a car fire is the one they use to manage the Murrah building bombing and 9/11. It is scalable. One of the things that system is built on is understanding that you as an individual can only really take in so many lines of communication at once. The whole point of that system is that I think it's 8. I'd have to go look, but at no point in time are you going to have more than a certain number of people talking to you. Because the system understands that the human mind cannot even really index 15 or 20 different lines of information being made available to you. Just checking to see if there's new information in each of these, or relevant information in each of these, is too much. Anything over, there was a magic number. But the point is that real world emergency experience has told us that more than 4 or 5 is really pushing it. When you get to 8 or 10, it's like, you're begging for someone to lose information. You're begging for someone to just decide, no, this is too much. There's not enough reason for me to be here. And they're going to camp on 1 or 2 channels, or 1 or 2 lines of communication, or 1 or 2 rooms, because that's all they can handle. Especially when you consider we're not paid to do this. We're doing this between phone calls at work, or between trips to school, dropping the kids off and picking them up, or on the way to band practice, or on the way to the doctor. This isn't done in a vacuum. Whether you are a new member or a long-standing one, this is an ongoing balancing act. Now, are there times where you need to separate a group off of communication? Yes, there absolutely are. There's one of the baronies down south of us, I think it's Steps, I can't remember. They supposedly have a huge fighter practice. I've seen some pictures. They do joint rapier shiv. I think they're like 30 or 40 or 50 fighters. And it's a lot of people coordinating. That is probably enough traffic of just raw communications that's like, okay, that might legitimately bury another valid point that's outside of fighting. So that maybe should be its own separate channel because it's too much information and this needs 4 walls to help kind of keep it contained so we can use it. There's nuance to this. But if you are in a position in the SCA where you can Manage things like how many Facebook pages there are, or how many Discord servers there are, or how many channels of communication there are, whatever it is. Or you're in a position to advocate for any of those, or you're in a position to even advise, suggest any of those. I wholeheartedly recommend we always start with a very low number, with the minimum number of lines of communication, minimum number of separations that we can possibly work with, and only increase that number when it becomes necessary to maintain functional communication within the group. Because those multiple channels, all of those things flying around, all of those different avenues that we can communicate on, it separates us. It does not just separate us one sentence to the next. It does not separate us between groups. It separates us as a group. And right now, separating, siloing out a barony or a shire or a canton or even a principality or a kingdom doesn't help anyone. It doesn't make the smaller groups any healthier. It just makes the larger group weaker because we don't know enough about each other to reach out and offer assistance or support or reward recommendations or encouragement or a happy birthday. It's the little things that can make a big difference. Building a community is about, in part, managing communications. And you can absolutely over-divide, and that's what we want to avoid. So, that's what I have today. Perhaps a little more technical than might be the normal for me, but something I feel is important, especially as the SCA is moving into the new year. And some of our groups are growing. And we're seeing healthier practices, healthier activities. And I'm already hearing calls for, hey, let's get our own Discord channel going. Let's get our own Facebook page going. And yeah, this is a conversation we need to have before that group is so siloed and so separated that it's hard. It's too hard to bring them back into the fold. It's too hard to bring them back into the fold. We need to avoid that. So that's what I have. What's it like where you are? Do you guys have 1 million channels on Discord? Do you guys have 50 Facebook groups? Or does everything go through your main one group page and it's fighter practice followed by arts and sciences, followed by a joke, followed by a meme, followed by fighter practice again? What's it like? Talk to me. Tell me a little bit more about how you guys handle it. In the meantime, I'm going to get something else to drink and try and de-stress about what it's like up here. Leave some feedback down below. Thank you very much for joining me. I look forward to seeing you at the next event. And until then, goodbye. God bless. If there are two things I've learned that drive videos these days, it's controversy and engagement. Now, I am never going to fly the controversy flag on a regular basis. It's not what I'm here for. It's not the content I want to make, and I really don't think it helps any of us. But let's do engagement. If you like this video, please go down in the comments and leave a comment. Make sure to share the video. And last but not least, easiest of all, make sure to like the video. That helps drive the algorithm. It helps get the video views and helps promote this material. Thank you very much.